Morning or good afternoon, folks. We are going to get started momentarily here. We're just waiting for people to sign on and join the call, so please bear with us for a couple more minutes. Hey, folks, we're going to get rolling in about 2 minutes here, so just stand by for a couple more minutes. We're making a quick change to our slide deck. Hey, folks, we're going to get started hopefully in 2 minutes. I'm just trying to get our PowerPoint running, so give us just another minute here to get it resolved.
Good morning, everyone. This is Vignesh Ganapathy with the Every Life Foundation and Rare Disease Legislative Advocates, RDLA. Thank you for joining us for the March legislative meeting. Today, our agenda has 4 items. We will have Remy with Senator Warren's office speaking on the National Biomedical Research Act. We'll have Camille Bonta with Summit Healthcare Consulting speaking on Tricare coverage for medical foods legislation. And we'll have Michael Werner, the Executive Director for the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, speaking on the Regrow Act. And finally, my colleague Max Bronstein will be speaking on our Capitol Hill updates for this month. So we'll start things off with having Remy speak. So just a moment here. Remy, are you there?
I am here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Well, I appreciate all of your interest. Do you want me to get started? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, I appreciate everyone's interest in the legislation and NIH funding in general. I know so many of you have come in one capacity or another to our office and met with our staff and with other offices on the Hill, and we've definitely heard you on the need for increased funding. So this was our way of putting forward a new proposal to increase the funding for NIH and also for FDA to help facilitate the review of new products, new innovative products coming to the market. This bill was introduced by my boss along with every Democratic member of the HELP Committee, and we did it because we are in a very interesting time right now within the HELP Committee in that we are starting to move forward pieces of legislation that are complementary to the House 21st Century Cures Initiative. And we have a really big opportunity within committee to take action on NIH funding before that package of legislation comes to the Senate floor. So this bill was a way to put $5 billion extra dollars into research every year above what's already going to the NIH and to the FDA. We have the money slated for specific uses like the Brain Initiative, precision medicine, research on rare diseases, research conducted by young investigators, research that's really high risk and high reward. So there's something for everyone in the legislation, and I think giving the NIH and researchers around the country that boost and that kind of dedicated mandatory funding that they can rely on and count on every year will go a long way to increasing innovation in the country. Currently, the HELP Committee is moving forward, like I said, pieces of legislation. Our final markup is scheduled for April 6th. So we are hoping to move either this legislation or legislation based on this legislation through committees so that we can have, make sure that we have NIH funding with this package as it goes to the floor, and hopefully, move a companion to House 21st Century Cures so we can put some sort of innovation bill in front of the President this year. I'm happy to answer any questions on the legislation or on kind of the process that's undergoing in the committee right now, if that's helpful.
Of course. I'll unmute the lines now, so anyone that has a question, feel free to ask Remy.
Hey, Remy, this is Max from the Every Life Foundation. Question for you. So how does the funding in this bill compare to the funding that was included in the House bill that was passed, H.R. 6, the 21st Century Cures Act?
Yeah, so the funding level in this bill is higher. So the House gives about $1.8 billion a year every year for 5 years. This bill does $5 billion a year for 10 years. So it's longer in duration and larger in size. We drew the buckets about how the money could be used a little bit differently. The House was a little bit more narrow on what the money could be used for. We were a little bit more broad, so the agency would be able to do more different kinds of research with our bill. And I think the final difference is that on the House side, that mandatory funding will go to the agency regardless of what the discretionary baseline does. So you could end up having mandatory funding replacing some of the discretionary budget so that you wouldn't see as big of a boost. Our bill requires appropriations to continue to grow each year so that the mandatory money can't supplant the discretionary baseline.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
And thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Remy? Well, thank you, Remy, for joining us, and we'll move on to our next speaker, and I'll be muting the lines again, but we'll have a question and answer at the end of that as well. We have Camille Bonta, who will be speaking on Tricare coverage for medical foods legislation. Camille, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your inviting me to be part of your call today. And I want to thank the Foundation for signing on to a communication that recently went to the Armed Services Committee in the House, and we'll be having a similar communication going over to the Senate, asking that medical foods and formulas, including vitamin formulations, be a covered benefit for Tricare beneficiaries, all Tricare beneficiaries, regardless of age, for diseases of the digestive system as well as inherited metabolic disorders. And a little bit of background, I guess, probably would be helpful as to how we got to this point. I represent the North American Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition. That's quite a mouthful. But for the last year and a half or so, we've been working on trying to get bipartisan legislation introduced in the House and the Senate that would require all payers, including Medicaid and Medicare and Tricare and the private insurance plans, to cover medical foods and vitamin formulations for this population that I just described. And it has been challenging, and we are still working very hard to find a Republican in both the Senate and in the House that are willing to lead the introduction of these bills. We think it's very important that this effort be bipartisan. And we understand that there have been efforts by the community that is affected by metabolic disorders to do something. This is not new to you all. You've been involved in these types of efforts for quite some time. But it's also an issue that significantly affects the pediatric gastroenterology population, and it is a struggle for almost every pediatric gastroenterologist across the country in getting coverage for medical foods and vitamin formulations when they are the prescribed treatment for these patients. So instead of, we're certainly not going to give up on this bigger, broader effort, but sometimes we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so what we have decided to do is to try to get a bite at the apple through getting the coverage requirement for Tricare beneficiaries. And every year, Congress needs to fund the Department of Defense. So there is a bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, that moves through. And what we're asking is for this coverage mandate to be included in that broader bill. And so we're going to be looking for certainly opportunities for the patient and the physician and other providers, that community, to weigh in with Congress and push for the inclusion of language in this broader defense bill. And we'll be reaching out to all of the organizations that signed the letter asking for this language, and we'll be encouraging you all to activate grassroots and to roll up your sleeves and get involved. We are very fortunate that we had members in both the House and the Senate who sit on the Armed Services Committee, who personally made the request that this language be included in the bill. So that was a very important step that needed to occur. And now we just need to be the best advocates that we possibly can be to get other members of the Armed Services Committee to take notice of this and feel compelled to include it in the bill. And that process is really just beginning. It wasn't just it was just a couple weeks ago that the members of the Armed Services Committee submitted their request of what they would like to see included in this package, and now they're getting ready to go on recess, spring recess, and when they come back, they will begin their work in earnest. Last year, this bill didn't get signed by the president until late in December. So it's very possible that this could be a marathon instead of a sprint. But what's really important is that when that draft is released out of the committee, that our language is in it, because if it's not there from the outset, it makes it very, very difficult to fight for its inclusion. And I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have around this effort.
Of course, thank you, Camille. I'm going to open up the lines now, so if anyone has any questions regarding Tricare coverage for medical foods for metabolic disorders, you can feel free to ask them now.
You can also write in using the chat function on the WebEx tool, so if you're feeling a little shy and you'd rather send them in via chat, we can receive them that way as well.
Any questions for Camille? Well, thank you, Camille. We'll move on to the Regrow Act, and Michael Werner is here with the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine to speak on this important piece of legislation. Michael, are you there?
I am here, thank you, and my colleague Chelsea Hathaway from ARM is on the call as well. Anybody has any questions or wants to follow up. Yeah, so thanks for giving us the opportunity to be a part of the call today. And we are on the phone because we want to talk with all of you about the Regrow Act. So for those of you who don't know, it is a bill that was introduced by Senators Kirk, Collins, and Manchin. And it's our understanding that it may be offered at the April 5th markup at Health, which Remy was also talking about that event. And simply put, ARM has significant concerns with this bill. And for those of you who don't know, ARM, which stands for the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, is an organization of 250 academic institutions, clinical centers, life sciences companies, and patient advocacy organizations, and all of whom have joined together to support efforts to bring cell therapy, gene therapy, regenerative medicine, and other advanced therapies to the market to patients because of their potential to cure and treat disease. And from our perspective, this bill actually not only doesn't help make that happen, it actually is counterproductive. Simply put, it would allow products to get to the market before they've sufficiently demonstrated safety and effectiveness, which is unprecedented, of course. It's not the same as expedited approval that we all know about, like accelerated approval or breakthrough or anything like that, because this actually says that a product can get to the market only by showing preliminary evidence of safety and a reasonable expectation of effectiveness. And it actually could be read to prohibit the performance of phase 3 trials, even if FDA thinks they're needed. So under this bill, the FDA is statutorily required to approve the product if it meets those criteria, and there are some other criteria in the bill. And again, we feel like that's unprecedented, and we feel like it will, we all want to see therapies get to market quickly, but this would allow products to get to the market without demonstrating safety and effectiveness, and we think that ultimately is dangerous, and we think it actually provides a disincentive for companies to participate in and do full-scale clinical trials to prove the safety and effectiveness of their products, and for patients to enroll in clinical trials with those products. There's also some other provisions in the bill that we find problematic. For example, there's no requirement in the bill that patients be notified that if they were to receive this product, it's been approved under conditional circumstances and a limited data set, i.e. that there's no requirement to tell patients that the product hasn't been proven to be safe and effective through a clinical trial process. The bill would allow for evergreening, so you're allowed to get to the market with for 5 years, and then in theory, well, not in theory, you're required to submit an IND at the end of 5 years, but you can make modest changes to your product and sort of get another 5 years and then another 5 years, and there's no, it's not clear what happens at the end of 5 years other than that you have to submit an IND. You don't have to get approved by the FDA, so it's unclear whether these products that got to the market without demonstrating safety and effectiveness can just stay on the market, and again with very limited information provided to patients. And then finally, the bill suggests that genetically modified cells are less safe than non-genetically modified cells, which of course would not be true scientifically. So for all those reasons, we really have a lot of concerns with this proposal, and we've been working with the sponsors over time to try to make suggestions about how to, for example, do a conditional approval program that that makes sense, that is more in line with the conditional approval programs in Japan or the EU. But so far, they've gone with the program that they have in this bill, which again is fundamentally flawed. There is one little section of the bill which is actually okay, which calls on the Secretary to work with stakeholders to develop standards for manufacturing and things like that, which is actually a pretty good idea, though we support a bill sponsored by Senator Tammy Baldwin, which does that in a much more comprehensive way. So I'm happy to take any questions. Chelsea and I are always available if anybody has any further conversations, but we just wanted to take this opportunity with the markup coming to alert all of you to our concerns about this bill, and because we don't think it's actually good for patients, and it's certainly not good for the field of stem cells and cell therapy. And why don't I stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Michael. As Michael mentioned, this bill is currently set to be heard in the next markup. The next markup in Health Committee is April 6th, and you know, I had a question. This is Vignesh with RDLA here. I was wondering what Tammy Baldwin's bill is called, or what the number is on that.
Sure. Chelsea, do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but give me just a second and I will find it.
If you give us just a second, we can find it. But Tammy's, Senator Baldwin's bill calls on FDA to work with the National Institute for Standards and stakeholder groups to establish what's called a standards coordinating body, which would be a public-private partnership to identify what standards need to be developed for processing, manufacturing, all of the things that are needed in order to develop a cell or therapy. When we met with the FDA leadership a few years ago, they actually told us that the biggest logjam in terms of getting products evaluated and approved is that in this new field of cell therapy, there is not standardized processes like there is in other pharmaceutical and other, medical product development. So the purpose here is to bring government, accrediting bodies, and private sector, and patients, and clinicians together to identify those standards and reach consensus on them. Do you have the number yet, Chelsea?
I do, yeah. So it is the, I just sent it to you, Michael. Give me 1 second here.
Yeah, it's the Advancing Standards Act. Will you hear me? It's Senate Bill 2443.
Sorry, Michael, you're out just a little bit. Let me.
I know. I hear a lot of fuzz on the line too. It's called the Advancing Standards in Regenerative Medicine Act, and it's S2443.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Michael Werner? So hearing none, thank you, Michael, for joining us, and move to our next Max and with the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases.
Thank you, Vicki. And I thank all the other speakers who were on the line today. You've already heard some Capitol Hill updates, but I'm going to try to give you a little more of a comprehensive overview. You heard about specific bills and specific pieces of legislation. I'm going to try to do a little bit of the bigger picture and then talk about a couple of the priorities for the Every Life Foundation. So I think just to kind of back up to make sure we're all on the same page here, I think many of you were involved or somehow supported this thing called the 21st Century Cures Act. This was a piece of legislation that passed the House last year, totally bipartisan, as you can tell by the vote, and it was led by Chairman Upton and Congresswoman DeGette. And this was a really important bill for a lot of reasons, but there was a huge amount of policy ideas that were passed in this bill that are important to the rare disease community, and we've already heard about some of them today. In terms of the path forward for that legislation, the Health Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, is the ball is in their court right now, and they're actually taking a significantly different approach from what the House did. So the Health Committee is actually going to consider bills individually, whereas the House kind of put all of the bills together to create these sort of omnibus bills that were voted on in committee and then eventually on the House floor, whereas the Senate is taking what folks are calling a piecemeal approach and trying to consider bills one by one. And the final hearing date, which we've heard about, is April 6th, so that's right around the corner. So that's basically the last opportunity for bills to be heard, with the potential for getting into a bigger package that would ultimately advance to the Senate floor. So here's where things stand. We have already had 2 of the hearings, and we saw that the Advancing Targeted Therapies for Rare Diseases Act passed. The Advancing Neurological Diseases Act passed as well, although important to note that the language in that bill was changed quite substantially, and it's now limiting the number of diseases that would actually be tracked by this system. It's basically excluded rare diseases because the limitation is based on prevalence. So we are hopeful that bill will get reverted or changed to the version that the House passed, so that it would actually encompass rare diseases as well as more common diseases. The March 9th hearing, which was the most recently held one, they passed something called the Advancing Hope Act, which reauthorizes the Priority Review Voucher Program at the FDA. I think there were a lot of advocacy orgs who were hoping to get permanence for that legislation, but we were not able to achieve that in that bill, but it is reauthorized, which is good news. And then the Patient-Focused Impact Assessment Act was a piece of legislation that was included in the House version, and it was not scheduled for the March 9th markup until our Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, where hundreds of advocates actually went to Congress and asked for it to be included, and it was then announced that the Senate would not only include it, but it was passed during the March 9th markup. And then this brings us to April 6th. We know of 2, and actually as of the last presentation, 3 items that will be included in the April 6th markup. So you heard about the Regrow Act from Mike Warner. In addition to that, we will likely see the NIH FDA Workforce Modernization Act, and I'll get into some more detail on what that is, as well as legislation supporting the White House's Precision Medicine Initiative. So to provide some more color around the Workforce Modernization Act, a lot of this language was already included in the House bill, so this is kind of the companion legislation to it, but it would actually create these new centers at FDA where they're being called inter-center institutes, and the way we have kind of interpreted these is to be mechanisms to enhance collaboration between the various centers at FDA. As folks probably know, there's a Center for Drugs, a Center for Biologics, a Center for Devices, and there should be a lot of communication and should be a lot of sort of discussion between those centers, because when you're talking about a single disease, that treatments for that disease could span all three of those centers in many instances. So it's important that there's good communication there, and we think that could actually help incentivize that. And there's also language in there that would help lift some of the salary caps that have affected both the FDA and NIH. This is actually a really important issue because it's about not only helping those agencies get the sort of best people in the door, but helping keep them there as well, because we want our regulatory agencies as well as NIH to really have top-notch people who are competitive with all of the opportunities that are offered in the private sector. And I think folks may have been aware that there has been legislation on the books that had actually limited the amount of travel that scientific officials can do from agencies, and obviously not a great policy if you want folks to stay up to date in the field. So we're working to hopefully lift a lot of those travel bans and those travel restrictions so that scientists can stay up to date on all of the latest things happening in their respective fields. So those are the things that are slated to be included. However, there are things that have not made it into the Senate consideration. One was language about compassionate use or expanded access. There was language on this included in the House bill called the Cure Act. We have not seen sort of companion legislation in the Senate. We have heard that there are very significant differences between how to fund increases for NIH and FDA. I think there's bipartisan agreement that new funding is needed, but there's no clear path about exactly how to do that, so there's still controversy there. And hopefully, as we come to the April 6th markup, that there can be a bipartisan agreement there, because obviously I think everyone in the community recognizes the urgency for new funding for both the FDA and for NIH. In addition to that, the Open Act has not been slated for consideration. For folks who might not be familiar with it, I'll go into a little more detail in the following slides. So this is basically a bill that's designed to incentivize repurposing of existing drugs for rare diseases. I think for a lot of folks who are in the rare disease community or are patients themselves, they are often given off-label treatments, which typically don't have great efficacy data for the rare disease, and the drugs are often not reimbursed. So we look at that as a challenge for rare disease patients, as well as the much bigger challenge of having 95% of rare diseases that don't have an FDA-approved treatment. So when we think about the concept of repurposing, it turns out to be something that is much more cost-efficient and faster than running a totally novel clinical trial, because it's a faster clinical trial process to get something repurposed, and you're not creating a totally new molecule here. You're taking something that's already marketed for one indication and seeing if it works for another. I should also mention that the legislation is actually modeled off of an existing law, something that has been in law for almost a decade now, called the Bpca, and this was a bill that was designed to incentivize companies to actually add a new indication to drugs, because most of the drugs that have actually been developed are actually been developed in adult populations and not tested in children. So this was a way to see if the drugs were equally safe and effective in populations for kids as well as adults. And so that bill passed, and it has been law, as I mentioned, and it actually resulted in about 400 label changes for drugs. So we think the same incentive could work for the Open Act, and ultimately we believe that this has the potential to actually double the number of treatment options available to rare disease patients. So real briefly, I just have to acknowledge the champions for the Open Act. We have Senator Hatch and Klobuchar on the Senate side, as well as Congressman Belrakis and Butterfield in the House, who have all been really steadfast champions for the rare disease community, and we're all involved during Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill. So we're very grateful and thankful to have their support on this legislation. So I already mentioned that, this bill is in the committee process right now in the Senate, and assuming that this bill and all the others will hopefully get sort of engrossed into one larger package, and then we'll go to the Senate floor for consideration. We don't have a timeline on that. We're not sure when that would be, but probably this summer. And then after it gets passed on the Senate floor, it would then go to conference between the House and the Senate to work out any remaining differences before they ultimately send it on to the White House for signature. So for folks who want to get involved and actually support the Open Act, we have an alert online right now. If you lead a national patient organization, we have an endorsement letter that you can sign on. We've already had 160 groups sign on, so if you have not gotten on this, I would encourage you to sign on today. I know many of you actually have done meetings with your members of Congress, but if it's something you're interested in doing about the Open Act, we can certainly help you meet with them, whether it's in D.C. or in district. And the other thing I should mention is that we are planning to do an action alert around Open, and it will likely be the day before the April 6th hearing, so stay tuned for more on that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Vicki.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Max, for the informative presentation. And if anyone has any questions that weren't that you might have been too shy to ask, or anything that you think of after the call, you can feel free to email or call my office, and I can pass on any questions you may have to the appropriate people. And of course, you can visit the RDLA website at rareadvocates.org for more information. Our next call will be scheduled for April 20th. That's about a month away at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And the agenda is currently open. We have 2 entries, but we'd definitely like to hear about any work that your organization might be involved with, any bills that you'd like to know more about. Feel free to send any requests over to me. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for taking part, all the speakers. And if you have any questions right now before closing, feel free to ask.
Hi, this is Steve Smith. I have a question.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Do we have some data that we could share with our legislators on how to quantify the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children's Act and how many times it's worked, so that we can relate that to how much it might do for rare disease drug development?
Hey, Steve, this is Max. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so there's actually very good data because this law has been on the books for some time now. So I'd be happy to email you some background there, and it's pretty well researched and well established. The bill led to about 400 labeling changes, so be happy to share that with you. Or if there's other folks who would like to see that data, feel free to drop me a line, and we'll get it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We have another question from Maria Elena Garcia asking whether the Health Committee hearing will be broadcast live.
Yeah, so it should be. I believe it's scheduled to be held at 10 a.m. on April 6th, and if you go to the committee website there, they typically live stream and have like a webcast that you can watch live. I'm not sure if they archive their briefings as well, but I believe they do typically webcast them. I don't know if Remy is still on the line. She might know more.
Remy, are you still on the line?
She may have jumped off. That's okay. But yeah, if you go to the website, they should have more info about that. If you go the day before, they should probably list all of the bills that they're planning to hear, and they should also have some information about the webcast. Okay, any other questions?
Well, thank you everyone for taking part today, and look forward to hearing from you all next month.
Thank you.